So I want to begin uh, this presentation in a very kind of everyday, ordinary way to kind of begin to move us into this conversation regarding technology and for the purposes of this video, transhumanism. So let's begin with an example. This morning, many people will at some point probably logged in and checked their Facebook page. And some people will see a picture of an event that happened many years ago. And Facebook will say, hey, remember this wonderful memory? And maybe we'll share it again or even add additional commentary based upon where we are at now. While this may all seem relatively benign, it does represent the ways in which emerging technologies continue to establish a new normal in our lives. When it comes to the relationship of humanity to technology and the things that we fashion and create, it is often the case that the things we make also make us and begin to shape who we are. For example, imagine I am driving in my car and an old song comes on the radio. It immediately reminds me of my high school years, and I begin to actively recollect images of when I was riding on the bus, listening to that same song on my Sony Walkman, a piece of technology that only exists as used items on eBay or Amazon at this point. But it also may remind me of the first time I danced with a girl at a party, right? Again, this is me driving in my car, hearing a song that I associate with my past, and I recollect that image. Now, philosophically, we know that when I consciously recall a memory, I am not recalling the experience purely as I lived it. Rather, I am recalling portions of it, aspects of it that cannot be separated from the person I have become since then. And what we know from science is that when I recall a memory, there's a network of cells that make up that memory or maintain that memory. Excuse me. There are a network of cells that maintain that memory, and in that moment of recollection, those cells are activated, and that network changes. Science also confirms that as you recall that particular image or memory, you are also actively forgetting related information. And so recalling memories always invites the potential for distortion. The part of that active forgetting is you are selecting out aspects that are most meaningful for you. So back to Facebook. What is different now is that the trigger for recalling a memory is not hearing a song that I associate with a particular time in my life. Rather, Facebook presents a memory to me through an algorithm that pulls data from my Facebook profile, my online persona, which already represents a social media version of my life. So there is a kind of double distortion happening based not upon who I've become in my life and my current situation in the world, but through corporate interests with concrete neurological effects on my brain. Now, Facebook says that you cannot turn off memories. If you go to your settings, it says that you cannot turn off memories, but you can control what you see in memories. Now, this is a little slippery. What Facebook allows you to do, it allows you to hide memories from certain days or a specific time period, or it allows you not to have pictures with certain people to pop up. This was in response to the emotional distress that people were experiencing when Facebook would present an image of someone um, that people were no longer with, romantic partners, former husbands and wives. So when these pictures would pop up, and Facebook would say, hey, remember this, it was causing a lot of emotional distress. And for many people, it was triggering. So I don't want to be alarmist here, but this should give us some pause. Right? a moment where we can step back and to think critically about what's going on. Here, a social media platform that has become powerfully woven into everyday life has its financial interests, and its financial future is dependent upon stimulating our memories according to an algorithm um, for our purposes in this course operates effectively as a norm, right? The algorithm is a norm determining what kind of information will be culled from our Facebook profiles. And what I want us to consider is that this algorithm, this process, is not transparent to us. Right? And why are the choices of turning them off or turning off the memories only limited to date ranges and certain people? Given the importance of memory in the formation of human identity, in moral experience, and the neurological effects, these are not merely academic questions. These are questions that are emerging as we speak and are already present in our everyday lives, unless you don't have a Facebook account. This example might not apply to you. But the point still holds in terms of how technology is actively shaping who we are, and oftentimes we're not raising critical questions about our engagement in it. So I gave this example again as a way of introducing our conversation between religious ethics in general, Christian ethics in particular, and emerging technologies. In April of 2000, Wired magazine published an article from the co-founder and chief scientist at Sun Microsystems, arguing for a moratorium on research in three technological fields: artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and genetic engineering. The argument was that the progress in these fields was advancing at a far greater pace than expected, and that our understanding of the ethical questions these technologies pose is lagging far behind. Since that article was published, these advances have only deepened, including the emergence of gene editing technology, commonly known as CRISPR. We are in a moment where such technologies will have major implications for what it means to be human in the coming decades. It is true, I believe, that scientific and technological advances always bring with them great promise and potential peril. Science fiction movies often attempt to give us worst case scenarios of new advances, but the reality is often much more complicated, offering many new benefits as well as burdens. For example, artificial intelligence may not surpass human intelligence in the foreseeable future, but it is certainly going to revolutionize and make obsolete many current jobs. The advances in AI are one reason why visions of universal basic income are being taken very seriously, more seriously than before. Another example is that every time we take an Uber, the data is being used to develop self driving cars. Self driving cars is the best chance for Uber to become profitable in the next 2 to 3 years. Indeed, these emerging technologies will continue to change how we work, think, live, and love. And the implications for issues pertaining to social justice are profound. As such, they raise questions for religious ethics, and in particular, how do these technologies change ourselves, our place in the world, our relationships to one another, and to God? One area of research and conversation that theologians have taken up for more reflection is transhumanism and the question of human enhancements. So, what is transhumanism? Inspired by author Max More, the World Transhumanist Association, known as Humanity Plus, defines transhumanism as one, the intellectual and cultural movement that affirms the possibility and desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition through applied reason, especially by developing and making widely available technologies to eliminate aging and to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. The second part of the definition is transhumanism is a study of the ramifications, promises, and potential dangers of technologies that will enable us to overcome fundamental human limitations, and the related study of the ethical matters involved in developing and using such technologies. In many ways, the use of technologies to enhance human life is familiar to us as athletes use drugs or supplements to increase strength and stamina, cosmetic surgery to improve appearance, students who take drugs to increase their mental abilities or to not fall asleep to be more productive. Currently, there is general acceptance in our society between or drawing a distinction between enhancement and therapy. Therapy is indicating the use of technology to prevent or treat or mitigate the effects of disease or disorder. However, the very idea of disease and disorder or disadvantage is already bound up with social and cultural values, meaning, and forms of power, all of which are subject to change. As such, this distinction does not address a more basic question of what makes for acceptable and unacceptable uses of such emerging technologies. Theologian and ethicist Ronald Cole Turner argues persuasively that there are differences, but also important similarities between the Christian tradition and visions of transhumanism. The comparison he wants to draw is between redemption and transformation on the one hand, and therapy and enhancement on the other. In his rendering of the Christian tradition, God has entered into the human condition in order to transform it. God intervenes in our condition to restore us to an original state from which we have fallen, and then glorifying or transforming us far above any original status. He then argues that bioethics draws a similar distinction, that therapy is aimed at restoring what was or achieving a normal state, whereas enhancement takes us beyond towards something completely new. He notes that classical theologian and apologist Irenaeus of Lyon, and here I'm going to paraphrase, that God has become like us so that we might become like God. The Christian tradition and many religious traditions presuppose that human beings are in need of improvement. Images of transcending the limitations of the body or our finitude animate many religious visions. However, there are other theological visions that counsel that our task is to learn to live within the limits of our mortality, our finitude, and that such aspirations to divinity could be idolatrous and possibly lead to human suffering. The point is this, that questions of human transformation is already internal to religion in general and the Christian tradition in particular. There are Christians who pray and proclaim that God is not done with me yet. There are some who thank God for loving me just as I am. And that in and of itself allows for possibilities for new life. So transhumanism, I would argue, is a contemporary vision and response to the perennial questions about the limits and moral constraints within human existence. Theologian and ethicist Brent Waters argues that for transhumanists, humans have fallen short of achieving their true potential, whereas for Christians, humans have not yet become the kinds of creatures God intends them to be. In response, both agree that humans require release from their current conditions. For transhumanists, this release is attained through technological transformation, whereas for Christians, humans are transformed by their life in Christ. Both agree that death is the final enemy. Transhumanists conquer this foe by achieving immortality of endless time, whereas Christians are resurrected into eternity, where there is no time. Consequently, both place their hope in a future that is speculative rather than concrete. So, embedded in what is often understood as secular conversations are questions of time, hope, life, death, our relationship to the body, what constitutes personhood, the sense of an I that includes multiple dimensions, such as the biological, the psychological, the social, the cultural, and the spiritual. I want to complicate waters a little bit here. There are liberation theologians as well as feminists who don't necessarily see death as the common enemy, but rather there's something about being in a relationship to death. However, um, and liberation theologians also would want to talk about death dealing systems, right? So it's not just the reality of our finitude that is seen as the enemy, but rather premature death as a result of injustice or unjust systems. But I also want to complicate waters in another way, and that is that I want to argue that our religious traditions might be considered as forms of technologies in and of themselves. Technologies that include ways of connecting human beings to one another, to the world, to the past, present, future, and it connects us to powers that are visible and invisible, material and immaterial. So for this week, there'll be two articles that are posted in Canvas, both of which address emerging technologies, and both have clear moral norms that are derived from the Christian tradition. I really want you to see how it is that those moral norms are engaging in these emerging technologies and these emerging questions about what it means to be human in light of the kinds of technologies that we are wrestling with as a society and in the world. Okay, thank you so much.